Welcome to the Gold Newsletter Podcast, your bank of knowledge of investment, economics, and geopolitics. Go to goldnewsletter.com for our publications and archives.
This is the Gold Newsletter Podcast. Fergus Hodgson. What a privilege it is to do the show this week and every week. And I'm glad to have Brian London with us in New Orleans, Louisiana. We have a man who has achieved great success as a financial strategist and educator to a broader audience. His name is Russ Gray. He's been on the show before. His own show is The Real Estate Guys podcast and radio show. We've been chatting plenty before recording, but Russ, welcome back to the Gold Newsletter Podcast.
No, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
I wanted to get you back on because when we were in New Orleans, you mentioned the importance of building what you call a tribe or a community. And particularly for younger people, I suspect that's something they just don't have. And you have an enormous tribe. You call it the Real Estate Guys tribe. So why have you made this such an emphasis in your own financial trajectory or financial life?
I think a lot of reasons. I think anybody that was in real estate in 2008 learned a lot of lessons. Some learned that their preparation was well done and they were ready to weather a storm. Others, like me, found out that I was woefully ignorant. I was living in an echo chamber, was reinforcing my...
Let me just stop you there. We joked a bit before that you had been in financial services back since the mid-'80s. How could you spend 20 odd years and not really think about these macroeconomic bubbles or ups and downs?
Well, this is the thing, and everybody listening, no disrespect to people who are in the financial services industry. I totally get it. But at the end of the day, most of the people in this space are commission-paid salespeople. Some are financial planners, true financial planners, and it's not saying that a commission-paid person can't do a good job, but the vast majority of people in financial services are transactionally oriented. So they're doing deals. They know how to fill out the forms. They know how to quote the rates. They know how to push things through underwriting. They know how to talk a little bit about portfolio theory so they can know how their product fits into your overall portfolio. I think the better ones do that. But your entire portfolio is floating on an economic sea. And so there's a lot of things going on under the surface. There's a lot of things going on in the wind and the orientation of the direction that things are going. There's waves and storms and calm seas that can lull you into false complacency. So there's just a lot going on. And there's no way any one human being is going to be able to do that. If you're out there on a sailboat, you've got the guy that's working the rudder, you've got the guy that's working the sail, and then you've got the guy up at the tower that's looking out at the horizon trying to pay attention to what's coming that nobody sees yet, whether it's storm or an iceberg or a big piece of land. And so you need all those perspectives. And the way you get those perspectives is you build a tribe of diverse people that are smart, that are diligently watching and studying, and then getting together and communicating. That's why we love coming to the New Orleans Investment Conference. Brian does a great job putting together a great collection of thought leaders. When I wanted to learn gold and resources and oil, I started going to the New Orleans Conference. That took me outside the echo chamber of the real estate world where I had lived for so long. It's why we do our annual Investor Summit at Sea. We bring people that aren't real estate people who come in and talk with real estate people. So it's a big cross-pollination. And I think you need to do that. You need to do that in the content you consume and who you listen to. Get outside your own box. You need to do it with the conferences that you attend. Try to find the most eclectic group of speakers you can find and let them, if you can, I love, Brian, when you put together the panels, and we try to do that too, is where you let these smart people talk to each other and you find out the way they think and how they process and the kind of questions they ask, and you learn. And of course, if you have the privilege of actually getting into some of these conversations by being in the room, all the better. So for all those reasons, and you can do the same thing at the local level too. And I think that that's a good investment of time and effort.
So pardon the pun, you were in a real estate bubble, right? You need to get out of that bubble.
Yeah, I call it an echo chamber. You hear things, I mean, I see that happen in the gold community. I visit the gold sites, and And people are looking for confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
And that, Sam Zell, who's an iconic real estate investor, we used to quote Donald Trump all the time, but then he became controversial. Fewer people know who Sam Zell is, but Sam Zell is actually richer than Donald Trump and really a more prolific real estate investor. But Sam says that the secret to his success in his book, Am I Being Too Subtle? He said the secret to his success wasn't his ability to see the upside. Everybody sees the upside. It was his ability to see the downside, to measure the risk, and still move forward. Some people let the fear keep them from doing anything, and that's a mistake too. So we look to thought leaders like that, experienced people who have perspective. Haven't had a chance to meet Sam Zell yet. He's on the list. We spent a lot of time with Donald Trump's attorney, George Ross. He's a good guy and really, really smart man. He was smart enough to get out of the limelight before Donald Trump ascended to the throne of the United States of America. And so, but George is a brilliant guy. So if you have a chance to get around these smart people that have been around the block, George is, pushing 90 years old. You can learn a ton if you just listen.
And I think part of it is the importance of education. Not, in real estate, in gold investing, these can be complicated subjects. And I tell newbies to the gold sector that they really need to invest the time to go to conferences and invest in a few newsletters, et cetera, before they get involved in anything but, beyond the most basic levels. And when I started getting involved with Russ and Robert Helms, his partner and the real estate guys, I started getting involved with their group. First, they came to our conference, I guess, Russ, about 5 or 6 years ago now, and kind of blew us away with the network that they brought to bear and their how they were just so sincerely interested in educating the public and our attendees on real estate investing and opportunities. But then I went to their event, and I've been involved in putting on investment conferences for well over 30 years now. And I was just blown away by what these guys put together. It has to be seen to be believed. Our event is wonderful in its own way, and I think it's the best at what it does in that particular sector. But these guys, their summit at sea is absolutely amazing. It's such an energy with it, and a focus on self-improvement and helping others improve, and a sharing of knowledge. There's no competition amongst all of these people who are involved in so many different areas of real estate investing and investing in general. And everybody's willing to share their ideas, their thoughts, and get involved. And the speakers they bring are just amazing. But the audience, I think, surpasses everything. Like in New Orleans, I tell our audiences in New Orleans that, look around yourself in the seats. These are some of the smartest people you can find. And that's one of the big advantages of going to these conferences is talking to the other attendees and kind of building your own tribe. It's a loose affiliation, but I can tell you, I'd love this summit at sea that Russ and Robert put on, and I'm going to keep going as long as my schedule permits because it's just so invigorating intellectually.
Well, I think there's a lot of good lessons in that, Brian. When you think about how you learn, when you learn to speak your native language, when you learn your attitudes, habits, and beliefs, and of course, how we think and what we believe affects the actions we take, and the actions we take affect the results we produce. And so when people want to improve their results, often they try to go back and change their actions, but they're fighting against their attitudes, habits, and beliefs. And so instead of learning information, which is important, people need to go to work on transformation, becoming a better investor, becoming a better entrepreneur, so you naturally make better decisions. So environment is the key to doing that. That's why the tribe is so important. When people come into our world, Robert Helms is a master of the environment. He creates an environment where everybody feels comfortable and you get a lot of sincere, genuine love. I mean, it sounds corny, but that's the truth. And you've been there. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It's just amazing how quickly a group of strangers become very intimate, very friendly. There's a lot of trust. It's a high trust environment. And because of that, any high trust environment, you always have to worry about sharks, predators. And we preempt that. That's part of our culture. We have very strict agreements. When you sign a participation agreement to come, it's no soliciting. We make rules about recording, no private recording devices, taping private conversations. I mean, there's things we do to kind of safeguard the environment.
Have you had this problem before, or did you just preempt that?
If you've ever been like in a church or any type of an environment, in a high trust environment, and then somebody comes in with some business opportunity, and you see it all the time. The Ponzi capital of the world is Utah. Why? Because you've got this very strong Mormon community and the high level of trust. They think, one Mormon looks at another Mormon and says, oh, if you're a Mormon, you must have high ethical standards. And the problem is people can come in and feign that. When somebody comes in with a little fish thing on their lapel, I run the other way. Some of the worst deals I've ever done with people that have professed to be godly people. So, I'm not putting any of that down. I'm just saying, as an investor, you just have to understand the environment that you're in. And when you have the opportunity as a promoter to create an environment, it's very sacred and we're very particular about it. We police it and people feel it. And they don't know exactly how we do it, but I'm explaining, a little of that. But why we do it is because it's the way you transform. Robert Kiyosaki comes on this event every year because he understands it's not about the information. It's about transformation. It's about paradigm shifts. And you do that in an environment. And so, you're not going to do that by just a once a year thing. So we hope that what people do, that's why we promote the New Orleans Investment Conference as well. We hope people will come to both conferences. They will be able to reunite with each other and many of the speakers and begin to build those relationships and friendships and reinforce some of the attitudes, habits, and beliefs that they were picking up. But we hope that what they'll do is they'll take that back home with them. And they will create their own local investment meetup, a mastermind group where they can get together and they can talk about what's going on in the world. How do you see what the Fed is doing? What do you think about what's going on in the gold market? What is oil telling us? Where are the opportunities in real estate? Which directions are interest rates heading? What's happening here in our local community? I think if people aren't doing that as investors and they think that they're just going to sit on the internet and look at charts and graphs and listen to pontificators podcasts and YouTube channels, you have to do that. I mean, that's important.
Yeah.
But that's the start of the education. That's where you learn the concepts and the language so you can get into conversations. And then the thing is to be very careful, as we talked about earlier, not to enter into an echo chamber where there's just nothing but confirmation bias and everybody is singing kumbaya. Yeah, it's, gold to the moon or real estate, forever. These economic situations can change, and you have to listen to the Jeremiah in the crowd that is saying, whoa, look out, there's bad times coming. And people, have to say, look, Peter Schiff can handle a lot of heat. Everybody talks about him being a perma bear, but he has a belief system. You may or may not subscribe to it, but he has a belief system that there is a fundamental flaw in our financial system that has the dollar on a course that is going to doom it. He doesn't know when that day of doom is going to come, but he's going to continue to warn about it because the fundamentals haven't changed. And people dismiss him because it hasn't happened yet. Peter, you've been singing the same tune for 10 years. Well, we don't only listen to Peter. We listen to other people too. And then we take that and say, how do we take action in this environment? Peter has recommended for a long time dividend paying stocks. Why? Because you should invest in income, not in capital gains. That's the same message Robert Kiyosaki has, but Robert Kiyosaki isn't a stock investor. He's a real estate investor, but he doesn't flip houses. He buys apartment buildings that cash flow. I can show you as a financial strategist how cash flow is equity, and then with my background in mortgage, how you can harvest that equity using the cash flow to protect it from a downturn in the market and take it completely out of the banking system by converting it into gold. So this is where it kind of all comes together. I've learned all this by being in these environments for the last 10 years and getting these diverse perspectives. And when I get up on stage, Brian, as you well know, I've gotten to a point now where I can share things with people they've never heard before. And that's because I'm bringing these diverse perspectives, and I'm trying to make it practical, tactical for that man or woman sitting in the audience is trying to figure out, what do I do with my portfolio now based on what's going on in the world today and the probabilities? How do I hedge against disaster, but how do I capitalize on opportunity? And that's really the challenge. And education and transformation and tribe are the three components that make that happen.
Every month, for nearly 50 years, Gold Newsletter has unearthed high-potential investment opportunities in metals and mining stocks that mainstream investors didn't even know existed. The value and profit potential we pack into each and every issue of Gold Newsletter make it an absolute steal at just $198 per year. Your subscription includes 2 special reports, Money Multipliers, resource stocks poised to triple, and The Investor's Guide to Gold and Silver. To subscribe, visit www.goldnewsletter.com and click subscribe now to discover how to multiply your returns in today's gold bull market.
And you're absolutely correct in that you tell people things they've never heard before, Russ. You're such a great communicator and educator. You know, when you talk about gold, I've been in this market for decades and speaking on it for decades. But when you talk about gold, I get new perspectives or, shades of perspective that I've never thought of before. And I've stolen shamelessly from you in my presentations some of your techniques and metaphors for explaining a kind of a gold-centric view of the world or of money. And I liken it to, Copernicus when he brought forth the first heliocentric view of the solar system. It just changed everybody's perspective all of a sudden. And when you view gold as the center of the monetary universe and everything revolving around it, it just opens your eyes to so many other things. Can you touch a bit on that? Because I think it's so valuable. And obviously we have a connection to gold here. And but your views on that and your perspective, I think, are just tremendously valuable for people who are not only new to the sector, but have been in it for a while.
Yeah, well, I'm probably different than the average bear in a lot of ways because I look at the gold sites and everybody is, upset when gold price drops in dollars. I get excited about it because it means that the purchasing power of my dollar to get real money, real savings has gone up. And those are the times that you want to collect. And it isn't about buy the dip because I have no desire to convert it back into dollars. I have a desire to convert it into retiring debt. But coming back to your point, and I can talk about that later if you'd care to. I don't want to go off on a tangent. But to answer your question, Brian, when I started looking at gold, I was perplexed. I'm like, how can gold be going up in one currency and down in another currency? That doesn't make sense to me. And I could imagine when I started trying to, understand the paradigm, how the astronomers of old felt when they had a model that said that the Earth was the center of the universe, and then they would observe the stars, and all of a sudden the stars would start going in reverse. And they're like, well, how could that possibly be? Well, it was because they had the wrong center. And so when you have something, if gold is becoming more valuable, it should become more valuable everywhere in every currency. So obviously the pivot point was gold, not the currency. And when you shift your paradigm, and I see many, many gold people that think gold is a vehicle to collect the very paper they loathe, it makes no sense to me. Why in the world would you want to trade cash? Why would you want to, you trade your cash to buy an asset in the hopes that the asset is going to convert back into cash, the very cash you're trying to escape. That doesn't make sense. So I want to go from cash to asset, either to cash flow, and then, I can consume that cash flow, purchasing power, really. When I say cash flow, it's purchasing power. Or I want to go into being able to use my asset to retire debt on another asset that does produce cash flow. So that's how I see gold fitting in. So if I can go out and buy a piece of real estate with $100,000 in debt, I've effectively shorted the dollar. I bought future dollars into the present, which I believe are going to later on be worth less. So I brought them into the present. I bought a real asset today called a house or an apartment building or whatever it is I bought. And then the money that I didn't use to pay cash for that property, I acquire some gold. I'm pretty sure 20 years from now, it's going to be a lot easier for me to pay that debt off with the gold than it would be if I put the dollars in the bank. And that's what I'm after. I can create additional leverage. I can short the dollar on both sides, and I don't have to worry about the payment because the tenants are making it. In fact, I'm receiving positive cash flow while I'm waiting for this event to happen. And so that's kind of the strategic use of gold and how real estate fits together. And that's one of my favorite things to talk about when I bring the real estate perspective into the New Orleans Investment Conference, because I got a bunch of gold investors there. I'm respectful in the house, right? I don't try to judge somebody, but I get perplexed at people who buy gold with the desire to collect the paper that they hate. That doesn't make sense to me. Unless you're going to do something with the paper, what are you going to do with it? I'm going to retire debt.
Well, that term you used before, confirmation bias, that's such an important concept that I'm not sure whether everyone listening is familiar with that, but why don't you explain what that means and how it applies, let's say, to circles of gold bugs and to real estate entrepreneurs or real estate investors?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you believe that gold is manipulated, then everything you see affirms that, and you discount or don't even listen to anybody that has an opposing viewpoint. So one of my favorite commentators is Keith Weiner. And Keith doesn't think there's any manipulation at all. I met him at Freedom Fest years ago, and we sat down, and he says, and I started talking to him about gold, and he started telling me I started, leading with manipulation, thinking that he was in the bag like every other gold person I'd ever talked to. And he goes, I don't see any evidence at all. I'm like, what? Really? Every single gold thought leader I know says that. But I'm open-minded. So we got together at Yard House in Scottsdale and had a couple of beers, and he explained to me his concept. Now, I'm not saying he's right or wrong, but I'm just saying the importance of listening to the opposing point of view, which I learned from Robert Kiyosaki. He says that truth or unity, he quotes Buckminster Fuller. He says, unity is plural, at a minimum two. I learned that from Kiyosaki, who learned it from Fuller. And the idea is that there's a perspective, and then there's an opposing point of view. For you to see the whole picture, to see the whole truth, to see the whole, you got to stand on the edge of the coin and look at both sides of the coin simultaneously. I think F. Scott Fitzgerald said that the sign of true intelligence is the ability to hold opposing points of view in your mind at the same time and still move forward. So confirmation bias is when you look at everything and only listen to people that affirm what you already believe. You're more interested in being right than you are in figuring out what's true. I was guilty of that in 2008. I did not listen to the people who were telling me that real estate had peaked, that there were red flags, there were warning signs, that the mortgage industry, which I was in, I made most of my money at the time in the mortgage industry. I was not listening to those warning signs and the people that were telling me that there was a potential meltdown coming. And so when Ben Bernanke comes on and says, oh, subprime is contained, I'm like, oh, well, Ben Bernanke says it's okay. So I'm going to discount the viewpoints of everybody else. Since then, I've learned if the Fed chair says anything, probably the opposite is true. But even that, is a bias in itself. So the point is not to sit in judgment, to listen to what other people have to say, even if you disagree, maybe even especially when you disagree. Try to understand where they're coming from and try to see the bigger picture. And the way you do that is by listening with an open mind and then processing by having conversations with people and fine-tuning it and coming back full circle to this notion of being environments where opposing points of view or varying points of view are presented, and then being able to engage in some form of conversation or at least observe a panel where people with those points of view have a conversation. You're going to learn a lot more. But the key is you can't sit in judgment. You've got to keep an open mind. You have to, Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand and then be understood. That's the key.
And it actually, there are shades to everything. And you may not be completely right and they may not be completely wrong. And you can gain something from just looking at their view. And checking your premises, as Ayn Rand used to say, you have to check your own premises and put them to the test periodically. But in this day and age with the internet and all these clickbait publications and everything out there, everybody gets caught in their own ideological channels, and they're comfortable there. They pursue people who agree with them. They like to get that reaffirmation of their beliefs, and they just dig themselves deeper and deeper into these ideological channels that they can't see beyond the walls of it anymore and see anybody else's point of view or even value anybody else's point of view. I think it's a real danger to society.
It's one of the strangest things I've observed in working in media, how it's almost as though people literally live in different worlds because their information is so, disparate. It's so different.
I used to speak in high schools to teenagers about sexual choices and the consequences of those. And I didn't really come from a moral standpoint, certainly not from a spiritual standpoint, because it's very hard to go into public schools with either of those two things. I just went in from a experiential standpoint and a perspective. And so one of the women that I spoke with used to use this little analogy that helped people understand what perspective really was. And she says, just imagine yourself, one day you're standing in front of your kitchen window and you're looking across the street and you see a car run into a telephone pole, or I guess we don't have telephone poles anymore, a light pole. And it hits it, and then you see the person on the passenger side get up and kind of look around. And you think, oh, there's a little fender bender, no big deal, right? Now, the person across the street sees the driver's side, and what they see is a little baby fall out and hit its head on the concrete, and it's bleeding out. Now, one person thinks it's a little fender bender, one person realizes it's a life or death situation. Same event, but seen from different perspectives. And the point is that if you don't have the full perspective, you don't really understand fully what's happening. And that, again, something I learned before I really started spending time with Robert Kiyosaki. And Robert Kiyosaki just brought it home for me. The greatest teacher I've ever been around. And it has nothing to do with the content. It has everything to do with him explaining really what learning is for, and how to learn. And I've learned more about learning from Robert Kiyosaki than any other teacher I've ever had. It's just been amazing. So if anybody listening to this can just take one thing away, it's the idea to go back and look at who you listen to, who you follow, and ask yourself, are they all singing out of the same songbook, or are you getting varying points of view? And when you do read a point of view or hear a point of view that opposes what you believe, do you judge it? Do you push back on it? Do you rebut it? Or do you open your mind up to the possibility that could be a valid perspective? And before I pass judgment, I really need to investigate it and understand it. Because I would say that in my life, I've learned that when I've been more preoccupied with how great it feels to be right, I've paid a high price. And where I've been more humble and open-minded and processed, I've actually learned better. And the consequences, I make better decisions. You still have to act. I mean, that's important too. You can't have paralysis of analysis. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about making better decisions faster. I just got done publishing a newsletter today, actually, and my theme is measure twice, cut once. And that's an old carpentry adage. And you think, oh, that sounds really good advice. That's really wise. And it is, except the problem is it takes twice as long to do anything if you have to measure twice. So the key is, how can you measure once accurately so you can cut accurately fast? Because when you're in the real estate business or any business, good deals move quickly in any market. And if you're not capable of crunching your numbers quickly, measuring once and acting, you're going to miss out. So even though it sounds prudent to make sure that you're accurate, which is really the lesson, people think that, measuring twice is a good thing. And yet, if you've been around a master tradesman, they don't measure twice, they measure once, and they measure fast. Why? Because they're masters of their craft. And then I go into a whole thing about how do you become the master of a craft, and I don't think you do it by sitting around listening to podcasts and watching YouTube videos. You actually have to get out in the real world and be around people who are more experienced than you, and you learn by osmosis. You learn, that's what an apprentice mentor model looks like. Those are hard relationships to get into, but if you can do it, you have a real chance to transform yourself from whoever you are today to whoever you need to be to have all the better things you want in your life. And I don't think enough people pay enough attention to their own personal development as an investor. They spend a lot of time trying to figure out the formulas and the macro and the microeconomics, and all that stuff's important. But if you don't get the transformation component right, it's not going to mean that much. You're just going to walk back in a circle. Your habits will drag you back down. It's like trend lines. If you do chart analysis, it always comes back to the trend line. Yeah, you're always going to come back to the baseline of who you are. So if you want to change your results, you got to go to work on the baseline of who you are. It doesn't mean who you are today is a bad person, but who you are today has given you what you have today. And if you want more, you have to be more. That's a basic premise of personal development. And I think, Brian, you mentioned earlier, that's kind of a component of what Robert Helms and I have been doing for all these years, is understanding that component of investor development and entrepreneur development is the personal development component, not just the technical education and tactical, techniques.
Yes, and you cover it all in your presentations and your events. It's just, once again, I can't recommend I know you do a lot of events throughout the year, but the only one I've been to is the Summit, and I can't recommend it highly enough to all our listeners. It's just a really, really incredibly invigorating experience.
Well, we're not doing it again till June, so if anybody wants to come check us out, we'll be at the New Orleans Investment Conference in November. Looking forward to that. It's our favorite investment conference, land-based investment conference. And so we make that kind of our hangout. We always throw the big real estate guys party. That's always fun. We invite our friends. Unfortunately, we have great relationships with lots of smart people. Last year, I think we had Peter Schiff and Robert Kiyosaki and Chris Martinson and Adam Haggett from Peak Prosperity, Brian Ucom. And we just hang out and have drinks and talk shop and process everything we learned. And when people do that event, they're like, wow, this is really cool. Well, how'd you like to do that for 9 days in a row? That's what the Summit at Sea is. It's a great sample. If you think you're interested in the Summit at Sea, which is a big investment, you can make a more modest investment and come to the New Orleans Investment Conference and kind of get a sample of it. So I'd love to have you.
Well, I appreciate your plug of New Orleans there, Russ. You didn't even wait for me to tease it, so unsolicited. Greatly appreciate it.
Well, I mean, I believe in it. Obviously, we've put our full weight. We invite our people aggressively to come. We bring our sponsors and encourage them to exhibit. We really appreciate the prominent role you've given us as an opportunity to introduce real estate investing to your community. And honestly, I've learned so much by preparing to present to your audience, because I know they're not coming from a real estate bias. I have to start with making the case for real estate, and then I have to show them how it intersects with the thing that they're already interested in. And some of these strategies that I've come up with and developed and use in my own life now have grown out of me preparing to present at the New Orleans Investment Conference. That's why I go back to this idea of your personal development. If you're listening to this and you think all this sounds really cool, start at home. Find some people. Find somebody that's an active real estate investor. Find somebody that's an active resource investor. Find somebody that's an active stock investor, and get together and make it fun, make it social, talk shop, learn from each other. It doesn't have to be super formal, but you'll find out it's magical. And then when you teach out of your expertise, you will actually get smarter. And if you remember one of the basic premises in communication, you have to reach people with word pictures that they understand. If you look at who I think was the greatest communicator of all time, Jesus, because Jesus had to explain to a bunch of shepherds, farmers, and fishermen.
Yeah.
Heavenly concept. Well, he couldn't explain to them in his own language. He had to come and say, "Oh, what are you? You're a farmer. Oh, well, the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, and we plant it, and it grows, and some falls on the good soil, some falls on," and they could understand that. "Oh, you're a shepherd. Well, I'm the good shepherd. My sheep hear my voice. They follow me." They understood. And so when you're talking to a gold investor, you have to relate to them in the paradigm that they already come from. And if you master that and learn how to do that, then you'll have people like Brian London saying nice things about your ability to communicate. And it's not overly complicated, and it's a ton of fun, and it will make you better. So even though you're serving others by doing it, you will actually become much smarter yourself. So it's not just the ingestion of good ideas and information. It's not just the processing of learning by doing when you put your information into action, but it's also, if I can use the term, the regurgitation of the information blended with your experience and connecting with other people where they're at, that will make you a smarter, better, faster investor. And I want to emphasize that word faster, because sometimes people equate going fast with being sloppy, and it doesn't have to be that way when you're a master. And that's why kind of it's on my heart, because that was a theme of the newsletter, but that's where learning to become a master at your craft is important, so you can move quickly with precision.
Well, we've raced through the time. Obviously, Russ has got plenty of wisdom to share, so his website is realestateguysradio.com, And he mentioned Robert Kiyosaki. His book is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And one book on dividend investing, which he also mentioned, is Investing in One Lesson by Mark Skousen. So I'll include links to both in the show notes. That's goldnewsletter.com/podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our streams, SoundCloud, YouTube, or put us on your podcast feed. That would be great. Otherwise, Russ, mate, it's a privilege to speak with you. I'm really glad we had you back on, and I look forward to when we next meet in New Orleans or at another event.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Russ.
Cheers.